First of all, welcome to FutureX Tribe Studios, which happens to be my house, and as opposed to anywhere else. But I want to first say, thanks for joining us. I want to put some logistics out here really quick. If you want to be interactive with us in the discussions and so forth, I'd like for you to just keep your camera on so we can call on you and have a dialogue just like we would do in person. For folks who don't want to be in the dialogue right away, go ahead and just turn your monitor off and just stay in, but interact with us on chat. There's a reaction button where you can react. You can raise your hand if you want to actually speak. Go ahead. One of us will be manning it, and we call it the voice of the chat. And we're really just excited about all of you guys being here. For the folks that don't know what the FutureX Tribe is, it's a group that Frederik Creugers and I really thought of. Fred basically said, hey, you got to create a tribe on who believes in the same thing you believe in. Doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means that, hey, we're all in it together. How do you bring a tribe? So you don't need 1,000 people. You need 10 people who believe what you do. And that 10 is more powerful than 1,000. But I'll be honest, we've got a lot of numbers. So there's a lot of people with the vision here. And the Tribe X, the X stands for anything that you want to see the future of in higher ed. So it could be the advancement, future of advancement in higher ed. It could be the future of interaction in higher ed. It could be, it's X is anything that you believe will transform higher ed. So for the folks that aren't a part of our LinkedIn group, we'd love to have you join us, because we're creating these mini tribes inside of the FutureX Tribe group to help institutions really think about it. So we've really done two. We've done advancement, and we're starting to do student records and student ecosystem as what does the future look like? And then we want to be able to take it to market. So I really just wanted to stop there. My colleagues are here, David and Freddie and Dr. Unsel and JTH, they're all going to be a part of the ecosystem discussion here. And I'm going to start right off the bat. What is community college's role in a thriving higher ed, right? And, when we talked about bringing the Biden administration and talking about it, we of course thought, oh, what is the Biden administration going to do? And what are the mandates, or what are the strategies they're going to put in? And we kind of said, okay, let's think about it differently. Let's first ask the question, what is a thriving higher ed, right? And so I'm going to throw out a quick poll that I thought would give you guys the ability to ask this question, answer this question. What is a thriving higher ed? What do you guys see? If it's other, I want to understand and listen to you guys. If this is multiple choice, so you can pick multiple answers to this and then really drive a discussion about that. So I'm going to just hold it up for maybe a few more minutes just so you guys get it. And the folks that are talking about others, and I'd love to understand what that means to you in thriving. All right, so I'm going to end the poll. Any last votes? Bring them in, bring them in. There you go. Got 87% of you. I think I'm one of those that didn't vote. So others that probably didn't vote. So I'll end it there.
Matt, you were never good at following directions. You do know that, right?
Yeah, that's right. My mom would say that to me all the time. So right off the bat, accessibility to education is one of the ones that everyone has talked about. Does anyone want to talk about any of this in the discussion really quick on why you selected one of these answers? There's very common things: skill-based education, affordable education, flexible learning models, return on investment. These are all key things when we think about community colleges. Right? I didn't try to set this up that way, but I think it's an important element for us to recognize that if we're going to have a thriving higher ed, all of these things have to come into play, right? And so the question is, the next question that I have, so I'll stop there, see if anyone has any thought. Don't be shy.
Hey man, this is Charlie. I just throw something out there.
Yeah, go ahead, Charlie.
Having been watching for a long time community colleges, and I have my favorites and I have my question marks. Community college to me was always an accessibility, to be able to get in from however socioeconomic background, but also to get into advance your career, job, whatever that means. And a key part of that, in my mind, has included not just 2+2 idea, but also VOTEC. And you see a lot of community colleges quietly wanting to move away from that, like pretend that's not me. And yet, we just did a project of a community college in Michigan, and employers are leaving the state of Michigan because they can't find people with the skills they need to run their plants. And this community college we're working with, Kellogg, is doing a lot of work in that space, but they can't satisfy it all. And they have call on manufacturers to say, your people are great, we love them, but there aren't enough of them, and there aren't enough of them across the state. And when I talk to them, a lot of there's just this abandonment of VOTEC that, well, that's not us. And this, we're not community colleges anymore, community and technical colleges. We're now a college, and we're trying to, and yet I look out there's some schools like Kellogg's really good, Madison Area Technical College, Milwaukee. There's some really outstanding schools that are outstanding for 2+2, pushing, like the ones in Wisconsin, pushing them into the UW system, but also providing VOTEC for jobs and all that. And it keeps the communities alive as adverse to dying and shriveling up. And I think that's a challenge of what is the mission, what is the role. And I just find community colleges has probably been the most fascinating, flexible. What does the community need? And I think a lot of people have kind of lost sight of that. Just 2 cents
That's
worth.
great. So for folks that don't know Charlie runs Moran Technology. He's been in the space for many decades. So he's probably knows more clients than any one of us. So Charlie, I appreciate the feedback there.
Hey, Matt, it's Nicole Engelbert. Can I respond? Hi, can I respond to Charlie? Charlie's always provocative and has great ideas, Charlie, but is it a reality or is it a perception problem? I'm one of the folks that put other, given it's 5%, I may be kind of the only one putting the other. And my sense is that we'll feel that higher education is thriving, and not necessarily when they're able to do all these different things, but when the public believes again in higher education.
Got it.
That there's kind of trust in higher education as an institution that will help make kind of lives better, that individuals and families believe, that employers believe, that government believes, because I think we have a perception problem right now, perhaps more than.
Yeah, so Nicole, hold that thought, because in the next 2 topics, we talk about that, right? We talk about, the value or the perception of it. So you're hitting the right spot. Was someone else was about to chime in? I think I chimed in. Okay. What I'd like to do is, what is the next question? I didn't do this as a poll because I thought this would be better for us to have the discussion. So what is the role of a community college, for these things that we think a thriving higher ed is? And I asked Chancellor Lambert if he can speak to it, because he himself has to embed this in his own institution, right? Chancellor Lambert, do you want to take just a couple minutes on your thought as you think about the investments that you're putting into your campus, and what Charlie talked about is something you're doing anyways, and I think it'd be good for others to hear.
Well, good morning, everybody. If you're not in my time zone, good afternoon. So first of all, I start with a very simple philosophy, and that is, we have to skate to where the puck is going, not to where it's at or where we think it's at, it's where it's actually going. So what's actually shaping that? Got to look at the realities of the demographics, got to look at the realities of Industry 4.0, the 4 superpowers, and how it's redefining every aspect of our economy, including education, especially higher education, community colleges. And then I'll just throw in one other, the shifting realities of the consumer's perspective, AKA the student. So we take all of that and say, okay, how do we position ourselves for this new future reality, and use full spectrum thinking versus the old silo, or approach, or that disjunctive approach to our thinking. So with that said, the focus is on tech skills and human skills and the integration of those. And that's going to be true whether you're a community college or a 4-year college or a university. If you can't figure out how to integrate the tech skills with the human skills, you will become less and less relevant.
Yeah.
I think that's very important. Now, why is that? Because McKinsey talks about the fact the fastest growing skills category is tech. And then the second one, and it's not close, is the social emotional, followed by the higher cognitive, right? So the tech skill is the one growing the fastest. So how do we integrate that? So I think looking at our curriculum more from a modularized perspective, so then we can start to break it down by what are the competencies embedded in our curriculum. And then can we issue certifications in addition to the degrees that come as part of your experience through a program of study. But that certification has to be industry recognized. In other words, third-party validated, not by us, but by industry. So is IBM validating that cert that you say a person has, or is Google? You get my point, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so then the line and distinction between non-credit and credit is gone. It's all about the skills and the competencies you're getting. And if you want to draw that distinction, that's on you. But from the learner's perspective, it's all about getting that skill required, degree optional, right? And I'll give you an example. We offer the Google IT support certification. We're doing it non-credit. Some schools are doing it for credit. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
So what's the difference? So we need to not lose sight of that. But I really would underscore that it's creating those micro pathways, keeping it affordable, keeping it flexible, and moving to potentially an on-demand model. I, as the learner, if I want to go and start right now, I should be able to start right now, because that's where everything else is going. So why can't we do that? So those are just some of my impressions. And
Yeah.
let me answer the question about the abandonment. And I think it's more nuanced. And here's why I say that. If you are heavily dependent on state aid for your operations, and by the way, I get no state money. I'm one of 2 community colleges in the country who had our state aid zeroed out. That your most efficient and most cost-effective FTE is on the general education side. I can fill up a classroom of gen ed students. I'm incentivized to do that. But the moment I want to do nursing education, all of a sudden it costs me significantly more. And not only in terms of the ratio of student to faculty member, and by the way, I have to hire high cost faculty because nurses can make easily 6 figures in the marketplace. And then the equipment I have to acquire and maintain, you get my point, right? So I'm not surprised that some community colleges are more incentivized to go the route of the liberal arts side of the equation, less on the career technical education side. And this I put at the foot of the state lawmakers. What are you incentivizing? Are you willing to pony up the dollars that require to drive high quality career technical education? So those are just some of my impressions. And by the way, I see someone with the Oregon Duck shirt on. My nephew is an Oregon Duck. So hats off to you. So I'll be glad to, if you let me, Matt, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Yeah, it's open to anyone. If anyone has any questions for Chancellor Lambert, feel free.
It's interesting. I remember going through a long time ago with IBM. I went through a sales school one time, and the answer was, when you look at your clients, you look at IBM, you look at anybody, how do they pay people? And that's where the behavior will go.
Mhm.
And over the years, I've looked at so many sales organizations and different things, and you are exactly right. If there's an incentive there, in Indiana, they fund Ivy Tech big time. Wisconsin funds it. Other states, you're right. Buns and seats for some, driven to some. Hey, what's the cheapest buns and seat courses you can teach, so we can look like we're actually doing something. And no, you're right on. You're right on.
I think one of the things that we need to also think about is when we talk about how community colleges play into a healthy higher ed ecosystem, is the vast majority of people who are seeking post-secondary degrees, post-secondary enrollments, the vast majority of schools, the vast majority of enrollment are community colleges. And we tend to think about higher education as over here and community colleges over here. But really, you know, community college is higher education in the US.
Yeah.
And it is the main vehicle that people get post-secondary certifications and higher education. And we need to change that perception. I think, you know, people, Chancellor Lambert, you were talking about funding. You know, people would never, you know, states would never think about zeroing out a university, but they have no problem cutting funding for community college because it's seen as separate or less than, but it is the higher education industry.
Yeah. So, and I know we got to get to our other topics. Like this is the speed kind of element of the power of these blocks, and we could certainly open up another discussion specifically on community colleges. But JTH, you had some stats in terms of what the Biden administration has kind of outlined, and what I wanted to make sure is I don't want to get political. I don't want to be like, oh, that's too much or that's too little. What I want is, if there is a plan, you know, whatever that, you know, Biden plan is going to be, how do we get community colleges to leverage it to make them do what they need to do to thrive in higher ed? So that's a discussion that I think would be really important just for the next couple of minutes, and then we'll shift. But
yeah, so this is just going to be a quick bullet point run through. There's a lot of information out there in terms of how these things will look. And how they are going to be positioned. It's great that we've got a Secretary of Education who grew up as a teacher and came up through the ranks of education. Several of the things that are coming up is the support for tuition-free community colleges for 2-year programs. That's going to be paid 75% by the Fed, 25% by the state. First dollar Pell, so people can use Pell for more than, you know, tuition up front. There's going to be a focus on completion and retention. There are going to be grant money available to look at some of the transfer, you know, the credit articulation issues, creating broad articulation agreements, what are effective remedial education approaches, a real focus on CTE work, and also a partnership between the Department of Ed and the Department of Labor to get union apprenticeship programs involved and more supported by community colleges, those working together. And one thing that I think is real interesting is grants and financial incentives to get community colleges and local agencies to work together to address issues of housing insecurity, food insecurity, and really, you know, to address the old saw of so many community college students are one flat tire away from dropping out. So that is getting community organizations involved for childcare, for food, for housing, possibly emergency loans. So those are some of the things that just off the top, the Biden administration has said that they're going to focus on. And it's a real, you know, especially thinking about those wraparound services and partnering with the Department of Labor to really get people focused in that skills pipeline, I think is very interesting.
no, that's good. And so I think we're really needing to shift to the other topic, but I think the other topic is going to be very relevant to this. I think as we start to work with community colleges and chancellors like Chancellor Lambert, is for us to start to think about how do we help them with a lifelong learning model? How do we help them, create offerings that allow for it? Me and Chancellor Lambert have talked about us creating an internship program for his students to come in and work at Beyond. Like, we got to be creative like that in times like this. There's no reason, and I worked at one of the top firms in the world. There's no reason that I can't have somebody at a community college level come and work with me. My daughter, who isn't even in a community college, is in high school, is writing and doing things for me at a level that I can present at a big 5 firm. Some of the articles I wrote were edited by my daughter, and her thought is different, right? Even the questioning that she was asking me in my articles were different, right? And Tina, you knew her when she was maybe 8. She's 17, about to go to college. But it's that type of discussion that we should have. Is why can't we create a consulting program for 2-year students? And then they eventually can get a 4-year degree. But while they're doing that, they're making good money consulting. And what does consulting look like today? Remote. It has the ability to be flexible. There's a lot of things we can do together. And that's the kind of discussions we need to have with our clients, as well as, the partners that we work with. So somebody's going to say something and I kind of kept going, but.
I'm going to say something about that. And I don't know if anybody is aware of or familiar with the German model. I'm not familiar with the German model personally, but with the German model of apprenticeship. I mean, they have something that is top notch over there. Not defending them, I'm not German, just in case you're asking, but I know that they have people, the equivalent of a community college, and students going for apprenticeship or internship into big automotive industries, all those kind of things, and that's how they get in the door. And everything from what we were talking about, the human aspect, I mean, the human skills to the tech skills is taken care of. Yeah. So I don't know, just to.
No, it's great. It's a great point. I think Fred he could probably explain it, because he's explained it to me a bunch of times.
Yeah, so I grew up right at the border of Germany and the Netherlands, and that's where I grew up. That's where I went to school. And I would say, there's another factor that I think is very important, because it drives how we think about these things, which is, so when I was growing up, and there was never any expectation, there was never a societal expectation that success equaled going to university. Right? So there was always, well, it depends on what you want to do. So they're heavily streamed, and there are some pros and cons to that. But what would happen is that if you wanted to go into a technical field or in an apprenticeship field, you would already start that during your later high school times. And so you would go to school for example, 2 days a week, and 3 days a week you would actually be on a shop floor, and that's why the skill level of some of the apprenticeship programs there are extremely high. But I think it starts with just a societal expectation that, not everybody needs to have a 4-year degree or a 6-year degree in psychology or sociology. So the idea of, well, it's good because we're creating citizens is not as strong there as it is here. And then I would also say that, Europe in general has a much more collaborative approach, effective approach, and they call it the triple helix model, between government, industry, and higher ed. So they work really closely together. And from my perspective, there's pros and cons, but you are right. But there is a prestige associated with getting into certain apprenticeship programs that I'm not sure is here as yet.
And Matt, can I add to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I've had the pleasure of going to Germany and learning about their apprenticeship model. I've also had the pleasure of going to Switzerland and learning about their apprenticeship model. And just as Fred is saying, right? I mean, there's not a stigma associated with apprenticeship. In the Swiss model, what they've done is actually they've built a parallel track for the apprenticeship that goes all the way up to the master's degree. So if you want to stay in that track, you can get your master's, and it's looked at as on par with anybody else's master's and 75% of the youth start out in apprenticeship. Not, and I think in Germany, it's very similar. Most students and parents, when they learn about the model during, their early grade years, they naturally gravitate to the apprenticeship side, not to the university side. And they usually have kids leaving the university side to come over to the apprenticeship side. And by the way, I've met senior level executives at Airbus and other insurance companies and financial institutions who started up in the apprenticeship side.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's great. That's great. So I'm gonna table it because we got to get to the next topic. And like I said, this is why I've been so focused on community colleges, and because I really believe that there is an opportunity for us to really shift how higher ed really navigates a little bit. And there's a lot of really good things that we can do with community colleges that support even a 4-year degree at a 4-year institution, right? There should be collaboration. So.